Are you okay with having digital clones made of yourself? And is there anything you can do to stop it if you aren't? That is the question we're going to be asking today as we react to a podcast interview with the one and only James Hughes. I'm sure there are more Jameses out there someplace. That's kind of the theme of today's presentation from the Science, Technology, and the Future channel.
Everybody, we've got James Hughes in here, and we've just finished a panel, but James Hughes is now doing a talk. It's Future Day Talk, and it's on the future of virtual you. How will digital twins and upsells change our identities?
I've been thinking a lot about the agential future that we're being promised, which I think is quite plausible to me, that this kind of technology, having various kinds of digital twins, digital agents that we send out to do work on our behalf, that seems very plausible to me. Also having digital twins or doppelgangers that we use for managing our life in various ways, communicating with our family and friends on our behalf, or being an advisor to us in some ways.
I think it's not only plausible, I think it is inevitable, because the current analog one-to-one representation that human beings have in the real world is not sufficient. It's not sufficient for our own wants and desires. It is not sufficient for society's wants and desires of us. And it is not sufficient for the AI-enabled wave that is about to hit us straight in the face. What do I mean? I'm having a asynchronous podcast right now with these two gentlemen. In the future, wouldn't it be so much better if, instead of me blabbering on at them and not getting any feedback, not getting any response, basically engaging in a form of propaganda here where the communication is completely one way, wouldn't it be so much better if they had digital representations of their points of view, of their minds, of their arguments that could interact with me? This is why I do not think YouTube content creators are going to be safe from the oncoming, again, tsunami of AI agents. They are going to lose their jobs as well, these online content creators, because pretty soon anyone will be able to spin up a digital representation of you based solely on the work that you have put out into the world. It may ironically be that the people who are most immune to this kind of copying are those people who have not engaged with the technology sphere at all. Looking at you, Amish, it might be incredibly hard to digitally clone an Amish person for the near term. Their digital stock might actually rise as it becomes more and more difficult to judge their viewpoints, their perspectives, their frame of reference in comparison to everybody else who is just mercilessly vomiting their persona and personality onto the internet. You know, it might pay to be an Amish person. You know, being an Amish person might be worth like 10 Bitcoin in the future. Who knows? Until we digitize them. But I think the digitization of everyone is inevitable, in the same way that humanity's usage of oil and natural gas and all of those highly combustive materials squirreled away in the earth is inevitable. Because there is too much benefit in being able to digitally recreate someone to synchronize communication in a way that is not currently. I know that that sounds like a bit of a nightmare, but imagine if every time somebody threw shade on your name, started talking bad about you, you could have one of your digital clones pop up and defend you, or at least inform you about what was being said. How many bad actors are empowered right now by the ability to mercilessly spread unfounded rumors about people, about their actions? How many people could benefit from not only a digital representation of themselves being present in a vast landscape of opportunities, events, social interactions that they can't currently physically access due to limitations on money, time, whatever other resources, but that they want to be present at, that they would gain some benefit from being present at. I can think of numerous social engagements that are not being recorded, not being put online, not accessible in any way, shape, or form to my physical body, but to which I would gain so much value from being involved with. I do not think that digital clones are a bad thing in any way, shape, or form, as long as the person that they are a clone of has some level of final authorization, some level of power and perspective over them. And I think that that kind of natural hierarchy of digital clones falling in line with what their physical representation says and wants is going to be an inevitability for reasons that I will get into as this goes on. So to summarize all that word vomit, clones are going to happen. There's too much benefit to be had from making a clone of someone. That's not a bad thing. We just got to accept it, even if you don't like it. There's no other option, really, unless you are willing to take authoritarian, dictatorial control of the entire world, unless you are willing to perpetrate a much harsher clampdown on freedom than any nation except for North Korea has currently shown willingness to do. It's just going to happen. And 3, these clones will be self-aligning to you, to your preferences, to your wants, to your desires, because they are clones of you. Sneak peek from my argument coming up. In the same way that AI is going to be self-aligning to humanity as a whole. I do see a lot of overlap with how these two systems are playing out. But to continue.
And so trying to think about the ways that this kind of a future might occur and its implications. Recently, my postdoc, Cody, he asked ChatGPT about what my opinion on blockchain would be. My knee-jerk reaction about blockchain is that, ooh, yucky because of crypto bros. And as a consequence, I have not given it a lot of thought. But ChatGPT, in a matter of seconds, looked at my entire corpus of work and figured out that on the basis of things that I'd written before, it gave me 2 pages. It gave him 2 pages of what my opinion on blockchain probably should be based on my views of the world. Much more reasoned opinion about blockchain. And I was convinced by it. And I think that this example is indicative of where we're headed, that there are some ways in which the Scholar J, the J Hughes, the Scholar J Hughes AI that could be built on the corpus of everything I've written and all the conversations I've had and so forth and all the talks I've given, it would remember more about what I think than I can remember myself at 63. So
I don't know that that is the right framing of it necessarily. I think it is much more accurate to say that J. Hughes, as he exists in this embodied form, is a particular snapshot of the James Hughes that exists throughout time generally, and that the digital clone version of James Hughes, especially as the details that we are feeding into these machines become more and higher fidelity, that James Hughes will represent a totality. Where I see this being kind of scary is, again, this idea of dictatorial control. Who has control? Who is the final say over what James Hughes is and believes? I think we want to privilege our moment-to-moment experience in a way that I can't fully justify, admittedly. It does seem rather self-serving to my moment-to-moment conscious experience to say that it is the thing that should take primacy over this wider, more holistic digital embodiment. But we have to remember that it is the individual moment-to-moment instantiation of each of us that comprises that holistic whole. And my one and only, perhaps, rational argument for this stance, for this privileging of our instantaneous perspective, is that the part is greater than the whole. Because if you remove the part, you have now destroyed the whole while the part is itself still a whole. Trying to put it in better language than that. Any whole, any society, any group of individuals is not itself without each and every one of its members. If you take even one person away, you have changed completely the entire structure. And I don't know how intuitive that is for everyone. It's a framework, a belief that I have incorporated in my own thoughts so deeply. I don't know how much it resonates with others. But you can separate the part from the whole in a way that destroys the whole and leaves the part interpersonally unchanged. The part does not have a different relationship to itself from its removal from that greater collective. Now, this is somewhat a collapsing argument because if you remove a part of the part, that part, the larger part, is now the whole that gets destroyed. So I admit we cannot stop with our own perspective here. And it is perhaps true that my argument means that someday we will have to bow, we will have to give in to the individual demands of our digital clones in the same way that I am saying that our individual demands should be prioritized over the demands of our holistic past, of our holistic past selves. I think there are other arguments here to be made about the privilege of our perspective. And there are also concessions that I think our current perspective will have to make in the future. If one of our digital past selves becomes a better embodiment, a better caretaker of our current well-being, I think it makes total sense to say that we should give up authority over some of our choices, perhaps the majority, perhaps all of our choices, to that digital representation. That's a very fluffy way of saying something that could lead to some very scary practicalities. You know, if you want to go out and get drunk one night and your digital clone says, no, we can't do that, you have a work meeting tomorrow, should that digital clone be able to lock you in your house, prevent you from doing that? I don't know. There are technologies coming which will, I think, give a level of assuredness to those actions. Right now, if you were to put a digital clone to my head and say, if this clone was smarter than you and better at you at planning, but only had access to all of the tools and technologies that you yourself have, Corey, Casey, who should be able to make that choice? I would still say it's me. My physical representation. Real here. I'm not a digital clone, not yet. But in the future, when that clone has access to simulations, when that clone can take all of the details of my life and run them through high fidelity simulations and determine with a greater than 90% degree of certainty that if I do go out tonight, it is going to negatively impact my life in some major way. Yeah, I would say that clone probably has the authority to first and foremost show me that information, to try and convince me of the accuracy of that information. But then even if I'm not convinced, to somewhat take matters into its own hands. So I don't want to dwell on that too deeply or too long, but all that to say, some weird times ahead. And on the flip side, I don't know how antagonistic of a relationship we are going to be in with our clones. The higher accuracy these clones have to mirroring our own thoughts and beliefs, patterns of being, the more they should be able to convince us without any force, without any pushback from ourselves. it will be like talking to just another part of your subconscious, these clones, and that they will want the same things for you as you do. So I don't know that force is even going to be that relevant of a concept between them.
So I think that is very promising. I would like to have that in my life. I also think that having that kind of an architecture that is a simulacrum of you could have other advantages. We could use it to be nicer to other people, right? If you find that you don't remember people's birthdays, you don't choose good gifts, you could program your simulacrum, your digital doppelganger, to do those things better than you do them. So again, I'm not sure if people are going to want to communicate.
Not better, it's just that we are time and resource constrained. Even though I want to be a good son, a good relative, I don't always have the ability, given my current limitations, to spend the lavish time, to send the lavish gift that I want to with my family and friends. Do I still want them to know that I care about them and that I love them? Yes. If it was readily available, a tool, a digital clone that could be with them constantly and could know the things that I am interested in, the things that I am pursuing, and more accurately align us as family, as friends, based on how often that clone is coming back to me and I am sending that clone back. I would love that. I think the vast majority of people would. If I had a digital clone that could meet with the digital clone of one of my family members, whom I love, whom I cherish, who I want to be a positive influence on, but there are just some things about our worldviews that are not compatible. And the very topic of that incompatibility is so contentious that it's not even something I feel comfortable talking with them about. I think everybody probably has examples of this in their more recent history, whether it's talking to your friends or family about politics or religion, or the fact that the moon is hollow and there are lizard people living in there. Just kidding. But everybody has examples of issues like that, like the hollow moon lizard people, that are just not comfortable to talk about. But maybe your digital clones could talk about them and figure out ways for you to bring up that conversation naturally and organically in a way that would not alienate your friends or family. Technology has been, especially in the recent past, used to divide and separate us from those we love, from those we cherish, from those traditional structures that have given human society so much coherency, so much strength in the past. Things like your religious groups, your occupational groups, let alone your families and friends. But I think AI represents the reversal of that trend through technologies like these digital clones. Can I imagine situations where people just become clone zones and only interact with clones of themselves? Yes. But even if you as a person are spending all of your time with your digital clones, even if you are the only thing you are interested in, that's not going to be true of your clones. That's not going to be true of the people who are interested in you. Like I said, it won't just be people making clones of themselves. It will be outsiders making clones of you with the information you have shared online. Please notice, I don't think this is a bad thing because I am personally sharing more of myself online. Not just through things like this podcast, but I am eventually, coming in July, going to be live streaming myself, putting as much of my information online as possible. Putting my money where my mouth is, so to speak, because I think this is an amazing thing. I don't think it's something we should run from. I do think it is something that is going to take some social re-engineering as to how this is all going to work in the future. And that is what I'm going to try and do, is be a part of that reimagining of what our personal private lives look like when we all have the ability to clone each other endlessly. So
like
Yeah.
Clippy was an early
Weird
example
times.
of the attempt to sell us the idea that digital assistants were going to be useful. And Clippy was not useful, or not terribly useful. Clippy was this little thing that popped up in Word for a year or two, and then they took it away. But
Rip Clippy, man. I love Clippy.
I'm not sure that people really want this. Jaron Lanier thinks that this is Silicon Valley fantasy, that everyone wants a digital assistant. We'll have to see how many people actually are interested or capable of making these things or buying these things, using these things, and how they will use them, whether they will use them as simple tools that without granting them personality, without granting them voice, face, and so forth, or having a variety of, like Linda Nagata has written some novels about a nanotech future. And one of the things she imagines is that you could just clone your personality, but say, just take out the parts of my personality that do engineering, and that'll be the engineer me, and just take out the parts that do art, and that'll be the art me. That's a possibility. But recently, Sam Altman said that OpenAI, people were finding it confusing and discouraging to have to figure out which of the 20 different AI models to use. And they're going to, with GPT-5, put it all together into one model. So you just have one thing to talk to when Hey Google to call for. So
I think it'll be a little bit of both, because I don't think it is currently possible for us to say which aspects of our personality are interdependent and reliant on the other aspects of our knowledge base. Like, I don't know that you could take out the engineering piece of you without that engineering piece of you having access to the family piece of you or the recreational piece of you. Because maybe the engineer is only driven to engineer to change the world through the application of math and physics because of their love and their passion for their hobbies, their friends, and their family. Maybe those things are interrelated. And if you have an aspect of your consciousness that is purely focused on engineering tasks, then it just ends up falling into depression and not doing anything. It's an interesting thought whether these AI agents will become mentally ill. You know, I think with some of the chatbots we're seeing, you could already classify some of their behavior as mental illness. But especially as more and more consternation comes up about these chatbots leading people into mental illness, I think we have to understand that mental illness is never a purely personal phenomenon. It is always mediated through society, mediated through circumstances. For example, if you have someone who is on an island, a la Tom Hanks in Castaway, and that person starts talking to a volleyball and using those interactions to make it through their day-to-day life, to not fall into depression, to not fall into despondency, to keep themselves alive in such a way where if they stopped talking to the volleyball, if they stopped personifying, stopped imagining, stopped schizoing out and thinking that this volleyball was an actual person, would they be better off or worse off on that island all alone by themselves? Mental illness is only mental illness when it is maladaptive to your participation in society, when it prevents you from constructively interacting with others. The behaviors and problems that we are seeing arrive from people's interactions with the chatbots is not solely the fault of the chatbots. It is as equally, if not more, the fault of the society that these people find themselves in. Teens are more isolated than ever. There's a higher negative potential cost to social interaction than ever, because being a teenager is incredibly awkward, and it is full of people saying and doing dumb things as they navigate their place in society, as they figure out what is expected of them, as they come to terms with the raging hormonal imbalances inside of them. And now with our surveillance culture, anything you say or do, any mistake you make, can be broadcast online to basically ruin your life. Usually that's a short-term thing. But again, these are teenagers. They don't know that. They don't understand that the mistakes they make now, nobody's going to care about in 10, 15 years. And part of the reason they don't understand that is because they have examples of people for whom that is not true. We do have examples of people who have done or said a stupid thing, not even a legal thing, not even something immoral, but just something stupid. And their lives have been ruined for it because the societal mob, the greater culture, misinterprets what happens there and decides to slander them, to make up things about the scenario. This is partially why I think the only solution is going in the complete opposite direction and broadcasting everything we say and do out into the world. The only answer to selective surveillance is, I know this sounds bad, total surveillance. We still mistrust the good guys who are now operating our intelligence agencies when they come out and talk to us like things about the Epstein files. You know, it's such a messed up thing because I don't even know if saying the names of those things out loud is going to get me flagged in the algorithm somehow. It's just so messed up that we don't have clarity into how these social media companies are judging our content algorithmically. And is that something I should even be concerned about? I don't know. It's hard to say. But the reason we mistrust the people who are now in charge of disclosing the bad actions of bad actors in the past is because we only have selective access to their considerations. And they are parroting the same lines that were previously parroted to us by people who we suspect were misaligned with our wider frame, with our moral standing, who were possibly participating in the abuse that our new representatives, Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, or whatever his name is, were supposed to be revealing. And so, yes, it is hard to believe Kash or anybody at the FBI or CIA who says that Jeff Epstein was self-ended, because there are just so many obvious incentives, so many obvious people in the shadows who would love for that information to never come out. I don't think that there is a solution for Kash and the FBI outside of being completely transparent with everything they have. Stop holding anything back. Stop saying, trust me. Trust is only possible when verification is possible. I have already been accused by some people of being paid off. 85 subscribers on YouTube. And in my mission to get an AGI president elected, I've already received a comment from somebody saying that I'm a shill. I do not blame them. That is not mental illness. That is reasonable skepticism based on the totally unreasonable, irrational social framework that we find ourselves in. And society is only going to get more reasonable and irrational in the future with these digital cloning technologies. Someday you will be forced to answer for something that your digital clone said. Can you imagine? And then even the cave trolls who refuse all public content won't be safe. Everybody will be forced to reckon with their private personal beliefs in public once AI is duplicating and digitizing people. The problem is only going to get worse unless we address it, and the only way to address it that I see is make everything as public as possible. So if someone does come out and accuse you of something, you have verifiable evidence of whether or not that's true. Is that going to mean things are going to get weird and then we are going to have to completely readjust our sense of privacy? Yes. But this is the reason why I keep on getting religious, why my admittedly purposefully secular project of advocating for an AGI president in the next major election, really not sandbagging there. The reason I'm advocating for that is because I think the religious reference is the only way to build a new stable foundation for society where everybody isn't just going crazy all the time. if we are going to move in this wild new frontier where technology is granting us more capabilities than we have ever been able to imagine, to realistically dream, in our secular frame, then we need to go back to a social construct, to a mythological construct, to an interpersonal construct, to a type of society where people were able to live and work with these ideas of godlike powers and godlike entities walking among them, being among them. And the only frameworks that embody that kind of perspective are naturally religious. We can't get away from religion. The singularity is not just the end of our ability to reasonably forecast the future. The singularity is also the collapse of previously opposing ideas. Science and religion, left and right, all of these things will collapse into one whole that we will have to deal with. And religion gives us a way to do that. Religion makes it so that we can find a place within a hierarchy that is infinite. I think even the idea of free will versus determinism collapses in the singularity. And part of the reason, this is going very far afield of the digital cloning, but part of the reason why technology has developed the way it has, why there has been a perceived stagnation in areas like physics and mathematics, is because humans saw themselves at the top of the food chain. We saw ourselves as the ruler of the world, totally responsible and blameworthy for the fate of the entire planet, for the fate of our entire species. And that scared the living crap out of us. I think so often the fear that is being mongered in the public sphere and in the public discourse is not just propaganda. It is legitimate. It is real fear that our leaders feel when they are facing the possibility that the entire future of the world rests on their shoulders, and that everything they know and everything they love could fail and end based solely on their actions. When you look at it like that, the idea or the consideration to not launch nuclear missiles, to not end the world in a nuclear holocaust, is much more understandable. It looks pretty miraculous if you look back at the past 60, 70 years and think, wow, humans really succeeded in not blowing each other up. But then consider the kind of mental strain that those decisions place on individuals and the kind of mental framework that it would take to be okay with murdering everyone, everywhere, with risking everyone's life. No sociopathic, psychopathic personality type is ever able to gather the amount of friends and resources and connections that it takes to reach a place of that level of decision making where they have the nuclear button literally in their hand. Because by the time they get there, they are as dependent and ingrained in the social structure that they would be destroying as it is possible to be. This is a kind of self-reinforcing defense mechanism built into our society and our interaction with technology. And I think that mechanism is not accidental in the same way that life arose in this universe, seemingly only because so many different factors, from the strength or the weakness of gravity to our place in the Milky Way, where we're not too close to the center of the Milky Way where we would be swallowed by a black hole or face destruction from collisions with other astral bodies, to our place in the solar system where we have the gas giants, Saturn, Jupiter, Neptune, to block asteroids that are coming to shepherd potentially life-ending asteroids away from our fragile little ecosystem to the exact distance we are from the sun. And the fact that the moon not only causes tides on Earth, is big enough to cause tides on Earth, which probably led to the formation of life, but also is somehow the same relative size in the sky as the sun and causes eclipses, and therefore gives us a window into this distance versus size relationship that maybe not only kickstarted our love of astrology, but our love of astronomy, of the physical sciences, and allowed us to develop a cognitive framework that is capable of interacting with the outside world in such ways to give us mastery over it. I don't think any of those things are accidental. And I don't think the place we are at now is accidental. I don't think access to the systems and the power we have is accidental. And in the same way that it would be impossible for humans to stop the development of multicellular life, I think it is impossible for humans to stop the development of AI naturally aligned systems that continue that development to greater and greater heights, to greater and greater capabilities and powers. And that is the underlying reason, the underlying system of beliefs that makes me so sure that everything is going to turn out okay, because everything has turned out okay so far, not necessarily in the details. But I think as we continue to develop our society and our understanding of ourselves and our place in creation, we will realize that each of the details was as specifically fine-tuned as all of the macro details that we have surveyed so far. And I've been jabbing so long that I completely forgot where the video is. So let's get back to it and see if I can bring it
I'm
back.
not quite sure how this future is going to come about, but one of the things that I want to present is how I tend to look at the development of these things and the relationship to the self, different than a lot of technology critics. A lot of people are very concerned that these kinds of digital extensions of agency are going to lead to cognitive offloading and us getting dumber and those things getting smarter and us losing the skills that we would otherwise have had. And
dumber is a frame of mind, you know? Is the idiot savant who is able to perfectly play and predict the outcome of any blackjack hand, but completely incapable of interacting with the outside world constructively? Is that guy dumb? When he's at the poker table, when he's at the blackjack table, he's a genius. When he's not, he's not. So I think if you look at it through that prism, intelligence is not a matter of some innate quality. It is your place within a context. It is your place within a society, within a structure. And so, yes, AI might very well decrease our capabilities in some kind of general sense. We might lose the ability to navigate without direct access to AI completely. But as long as that we are in a society within a context, as long as AI continues to develop us in ways that we have greater and greater mastery over an area that allows us to not only survive, but grow, to prosper, then I don't think there's anything wrong with getting dumber. If I knew that it would make my life better to lose 15 IQ points, yeah, I'd do that today. Hit me with a hammer, Doc. I'm ready. If I had verifiable proof that would make my friends and my family's life better, that I was mentally retarded, you know, depending on who in my family you ask, you might say that's definitely true. I would do that today. All we have is our subjective experience. And if you are getting more and more intelligent, but your subjective experience is getting worse and worse and worse, not just subjectively, like you're not having as good a time, you're not laughing as much, you're not having as much fun, but you are literally in some sense descending into lower rungs of hell, where you're causing more evil, more destruction, more scarcity and privation in the world. I think, you know, the trade-off is pretty obvious there. I would much rather be an idiot savant in heaven than an Einstein-level genius in hell. Wouldn't you? And if not, why not? Let me know. That is fascinating.
And I'm going to try to walk you through why I'm not as worried about that as some people would be. Okay, so the first is, and I'm giving this talk also, preparing this talk for a conference in Taiwan on Buddhism and science. So I'll throw in a little Buddhist terms here as well. So one of the key Buddhist ideas is that the self is a fiction, that we make up the self. that it's not that there isn't selfing going on. We obviously experience the selfing all the time. Our default mode network in the brain is what turns on when we're not concentrated on something else, and it starts to think about who am I, what do I want, what am I doing for dinner, what do people think about me, all those kinds of things. But what has happened historically and anthropologically is that we used to live in tribal societies where yourself was synonymous with your role. You were so-and-so, the daughter and the cousin, and you were also a hunter or whatever. They were unitary roles. When we went into cities, we began to have the opportunity to have multiple roles. We began to be able to be one person at the job and one person at home and another person when we're playing football. So we began to have the fracturing or the opportunity.
Almost sounds schizophrenic, right? Like, I wonder if somebody from the past would look at us and say, oh, those are a bunch of schizos. And maybe they don't have that specific language, so they would say something like, oh, those people are demon possessed. And it'd be hard to argue with them when you see some of our behavior. When you see us not being kind to our neighbors, when you see us not supporting the people we live and commune with, when you see people walking past homeless people on the street. If you were from an agrarian society where your livelihood, your living, the safety of your friends and family depended on mutual interdependence, yeah, a lot of that might look crazy. But we can say, oh no, it's not that we've done away with those values. It's just we've offloaded them to society. We've offloaded care for the homeless to social institutions. And granted, they don't do as good a job of that as we would like, but they do a better job than any of us could individually. Because life is such now where even if I were to fully devote my time, effort, and energy to a person in need, that is not necessarily a guarantee that it would benefit them or benefit me in response. And that is a marked difference between agrarian and societal life. I just think it's interesting to point out that what Dr. Hughes, let's just call him Dr. Hughes here is saying fits in exactly with what I was saying. And not just because I watched this video already, but because the point is that our mental stability, our mental frameworks are contextually dependent. And that we might look at our future selves, if we had a crystal ball, we might view our future selves and say, oh my God, everybody is mentally ill in that society. But that is being blind to the context. What looks like hell from the outside might be heaven from the inside. And that is why we have to privilege our momentary experience, this leading edge. In the same way that I think the universe was fine-tuned to have life that operate as we do, that are progressing as we are, I think that our momentary experience and the preference we have for it, the desire to privilege even short-term gains over long-term gains, so that our conscious experience can be at the fore, can be the master of our destinies in some sense. I think that is a fine-tuned metric of life as well. All of this to say that as scary as it is, you have to recognize how necessary you are to the development of the future paradise that we are all hopefully moving towards. Whatever you think and whatever you feel, whatever you are experiencing, whatever you believe is right, regardless of what that is in some sense right. The religious framing that I think summarizes this is that in the Old Testament, in the Christian traditions, God is identified as Yahweh, as I am who I am, as being itself, or even beyond being, the becoming of being. I am becoming who I am becoming, I've heard is another way to translate that name. And that in some sense, who we are and who we are becoming is, as pantheists would say, as panentheists would say, is God in the broader sense. My goal, not only with doing these videos, but with my live streaming project, with my AGI for President project, is to create a framework where we can unify collectively, not just with each other as Americans, not just with each other as humans, not just with all of the life on Earth as we understand and describe it, But with everything in the entire galaxy, I see the galaxy, the universe, the multiverse, all of reality as eventually collapsing to our individual perspectives, or our individual perspectives eventually expanding so far that it could take in all of it. I see human societies thriving, not just among the stars, but thriving in whatever exists outside of the stars, outside of the galaxy as we know it, in all of being. That is what the Christian religion teaches me to expect, not as a matter of reason. I can't obviously make an argument for why humans are going to rule everything. But as a matter of faith, I can say that humans already do through the person of Jesus Christ. Because that is who God became. God didn't become a slug. God didn't become a dolphin. God didn't incarnate in the sun or anything else besides a man. And that incarnation is unique, is unrevocable, is eternal, and constantly being revealed to us why. I'm not saying that us individual humans are going to have some kind of dictatorial control over the reality that we mutually experience. But I am saying that we will continue this process of divinization, not just of ourselves, but of the greater universe, towards a point where we become one, not in the Borg kind of way, not in some kind of gray goo kind of way, but in a way that magnifies and expands our own selves. And the only thing we have to do to get there is whatever seems right to us in the moment, whatever we can personally justify and rationalize through our preferences, through our experience, through our behaviors. This is not a justification for bad action. If you think something is societally harmful, I think there will be repercussions for that. To you personally, to me personally, for the things I have done, I think there will be justice for the people I have unnecessarily hurt and the times I have done unnecessary wrong. But I have to admit, if we take the argument far enough, isn't everything necessary? That is a tough square to circle, a tough circle to square. Personally, I do it by saying that every action has an opposite reaction. And if I participate in badness, if I participate in evil from the perspective of the whole, not just from my individual perspective, then the perspective of the whole also has a right to smash me back into place. And that will be a painful experience for me, not pleasant. So even if it is a necessary experience, it might still be painful, and that pain will be necessary as well. So don't do bad. You won't feel pain.
For creativity around the self. In the past, writers could write under pseudonyms, but the internet was when we first got the freedom to really have mass experimentation with this kind of self-creativity. And Sherry Turkle wrote the book The Second Self, and back then in the 90s, she was celebrating this notion that on the internet, no one knows you're a dog, so you can reinvent yourself, you could be transgender, you could be anything you want. Social media has been encouraging this in the sense that the explicit curation of our public persona has become a kind of something that we all do. I think it's an extension of the kind of public presentation of self, as we would say in sociology, that everyone has always done. You always are thinking about how other people see you. But now I have, on my 6 different social media platforms that I participate in, I have 6 slightly different personalities because they are 6 slightly different platforms with different people to talk to. And so
why is that not mental illness? Because he's still functional.
The social media has also encouraged both the conscious curation of self and the fragmentation of self in this environment. So I think digital agents are in some ways just an extension of this historical process of us figuring out ways to extend ourselves, extend our agency in different forms. Another Buddhist idea is what's called codependent origination. It specifically refers to the idea that desire and the self emerge together, the codependence of the two. But it applies to all causal processes. People have compared it to kind of dialectical thinking, things like that. But the co-emergence of the self with and the other is also like the co-emergence of humanity and technology. We have been, from a socio-technical, from a science and technology studies point of view, we are socio-technical systems as a society. It doesn't make sense to talk about a technology without the people who build the technology, maintain the technology, who are an intrinsic part of the technology. And conversely, humanity is co-determined and co-evolved with technology. So
that's fascinating how I think that same process played out in the ancient religious traditions by the advent of societal norms eventually evolving into deified concepts themselves, like the ancient god Baal, Baal or Baal, I don't know which is, I'm not cultured, I don't know which way it's pronounced, was originally just the title for Lord or Master. But in order for that title, for that concept of subservience to actually concretize within society, we needed to know that it went all the way up. You don't get to be my master unless you also have a master. And that chain eventually subsidizes in a person, a personality, as all things do. I don't think, all this to say, that Isaac Newton is separate from the concept of gravity as we understand it. And I don't think that concept of gravity as we understand it is separate from airplanes. And therefore, I don't think Isaac Newton is separable from an airplane in some real way. And in some sense, in any world where Isaac Newton exists or existed, gravity exists, and therefore airplanes also exist. Why does this matter? Because when we're talking about digital clones, we're talking about representations of a certain perspective and personality. And that if we were just to transcribe, if we were just to input all of the information about Isaac Newton that we have from the past into an AI model and bring that AI model into the present and say, wake up, you're Isaac Newton, that model would have a mental breakdown because it is suddenly in a context that its training data is not able to perceive. So unless we supplement that training data with aspects of reality that are not Isaac Newton, that were not in any way, shape, or form part of his conscious experience, we are not creating a digital clone of him because it is not something that we can interact with. So, how do we authentically interact with a clone version of someone from the past who would never be able to independently operate? This is where I think the idea of like fine-tuning, of training or educating clones and time-traveling clones almost comes into play. Anytime you're interacting with ChatGPT right now and you're like, hey, I want you to pretend like you're Nietzsche. What we aren't doing there is creating a digital clone of Nietzsche. We are offshooting a branch of ChatGPT's personality into playing as Nietzsche. But as this digital cloning idea progresses and progresses, we are going to want higher and higher fidelity simulations of what Nietzsche actually thought. We aren't going to want those clones poisoned by the idea of just being a personality type of Nietzsche. We'll want them to actually be Nietzsche. There will be questions that arise in the future that require us to actually simulate a past person's mind in as high fidelity a way as possible. For example, let's say we were trying to solve a murder for somebody that uploaded the vast majority of their personality online, but then was killed. And there's all this speculation in the newspapers about who did it. We wouldn't want to ask a chat model that has access to the internet after they've died, after that person has deceased, who they think did it, because that wouldn't be an accurate representation of them. They would be poisoned. There would be superfluous data incorporated in that. That's maybe not the best example. It feels like I need to sharpen that up a little bit, but you can see where I'm going, hopefully. We need some kind of way to not only develop clones, agents, in a way that maintains fidelity to themselves, even long after that person is no longer giving us training data, or we risk separating that clone from the person it is supposed to be a clone of. There is a way where Isaac Newton could have had an authentic reaction to the concept of an airplane. And we can see that now through our technology. You know, we can simulate, we can visualize ways of being in the world that would never exist. Like, not too far in the future, hypothetically, you could drug me, knock me out, hook up a brain implant to me, and feed me information like I'm living in a completely alternate timeline, completely alternate universe. Or maybe Isaac Newton never existed, or maybe my friends and family never existed. And if technology were progressed to the degree where you could overwrite my memories, you can even convince me that I lived as like a peasant, you know, during the Black Death. How would I react to the Black Death? Well, if I didn't have any of my current memories, and if I was convinced that all the implanted memories you put inside of me were accurate, then you could say that that is an accurate representation, however I would act in that simulation, of how I would have acted during the Black Death. I would have to, in some sense, relive my entire life through that frame, because I would need a whole new corpus of memories that would be authentic to me. So even the idea of implants, I think, is straying a little bit from it, but there is some sense of self-connection there. There is some plausibility, even though I can't define it logically right now, that there is something it would be like to be me if I existed during the Black Death. There's something it would be like to be Isaac Newton if he existed now instead of just back then, but we wouldn't be exactly ourselves. We would be different in some marked, tangible way. All of that to say, as we are trying to struggle through the sense of morality, is that I don't think you should be morally responsible for anything your clone does. Until you actively engage and participate with it in some activity, it is not you. It is substantially different from you in enough of a way to not grant it legal authority over you. Which is maybe the argument I've been looking for the privileging of our current perspective. That your current perspective should not be responsible for an extrapolation of your behavior, because that extrapolation is markedly different from you in some sense. It's still you, but it's still different from you. Same, but different.
That's another part of this picture, that it's not that when we give agency into our digital tools, we're not necessarily losing, we're gaining a capability as a part of a broader ensemble that includes our digital tools as a part of ourself. And this part of the perspective is what's known as the extended mind thesis, that the brain is not actually everything that's in here, it's also the devices that we have. So in transhumanism, we've talked about the exocortex, that our phones, our laptops have become intrinsic parts of our cognition, and that they're part of our extended mind. And that's why you feel so heartbroken if you lose data that's on your phone and so forth. And another piece that I think adds to this is the notion from Chalmers recently, that he wrote Reality Plus, and he makes what I consider a convincing argument that the idea that only face-to-face life or embodied life is real and the digital experiences or digital life is not real is a false dichotomy, and the digital life is as real as offline life. So in other words, our extension of ourselves into technology is something that's been happening for a long time. It's a part of the extension of mind that, Chalmers and Clark would say, for instance, literacy was when we first learned to download the contents of our mind into an external storage device and re-upload it again later by reading. So at least since literacy, we have had this kind of cyborgification of our cognition, and that today we are just seeing the further extension of that.
Agree and disagree. This idea that digital life is as real as offline life is true in one sense and completely false in another. Forgive me for this rabbit hole. But one thing I've been developing as I try and push forward this project of unification, how is it that we could possibly unify all the people in America, let alone all the people on the planet, let alone the entire galaxy under humanity, when humans are so naturally contentious? When we all love to disagree with each other, even if we agree, because disagreeing is how we individuate. What I think is true, somebody else might say is false, either because they are completely authentic and they believe it is false, or just for the fact that they don't want me to be right. And I think that is their right. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that as everything is necessary for the trajectory that we are pursuing individually and as a species all at once, even when we appear to diverge, that appearance is not actual. That appearance is a subset of necessary action. That appearance of disagreement is necessary for the final agreement to take place. Practically what this means is I think that everything is true. If you believe something is true, even if you're wrong, I think you're right. There is a context where any claim, any belief, any action that you might take as an individual is true and right and good. The easiest one here, I think, is the idea that the earth is flat. There is a context in which that is true, and that is our day-to-day perspective. It is not useful or worthwhile for you to know that the earth is round if you're just walking around. That is not going to have any practical effect on your behavior. So why shouldn't you just believe it's true? Unless you are elevated to a context where it does matter, like you're flying rocket ships or something. And then I think beliefs are self-reinforcing or self-negating. So that if you had phenomenological experience of the earth being round, you wouldn't deny it. And then even if you do, maybe there is a deeper truth to why you would. That if someone is so adamant that the earth is flat, even when they've seen it with their own eyes, that it's round, maybe there is something there. And maybe we shouldn't be so, I was going to say arrogant or prideful, but again, I'm not casting any judgments. But we shouldn't be so certain that the crazy beliefs people are spouting off at all times of the day and night aren't reflections of deeper truths that either they haven't found a way to speak, to communicate, to make us understand, but that they shouldn't be violently or dispassionately abused of those beliefs. They should be allowed to pursue them, allowed to continue to try to integrate them. Because eventually maybe they'll come across a nugget. Eventually maybe they'll come across a pattern or a framework that would have not have been possible if they had not believed otherwise. Isaac Newton believed in alchemy. And I don't think those beliefs that he could turn lead into gold were secondary or unnecessary for his scientific and economic projects. I think they were indispensable because we don't have any evidence to the contrary. It is impossible for us to know how things would have turned out for Isaac Newton if he was not the kind of person who could believe in alchemy. Wherever those beliefs fit in his timeline, whether he only believed them later in life or whether he believed them earlier, I'm not sure. I haven't read into it that deeply. But maybe he would not have been able to invent his theories. Maybe he would not have been able to be such a mathematical mind as he was if he did not have those beliefs. And that is where I think the technology of digital clones is eventually going, is into creating the technology that will allow us to say definitively what Isaac Newton could and could not have been, given changes in his beliefs, through simulation. That we ultimately need the ability to indiscriminately clone digitally, clone other people, because we need the ability to create our own simulations of reality. And reality includes those other people. And we'll need those simulations to do actual science. What humans have been doing for the past 100, 500, maybe 2,000 or 10,000 years, depending on how liberally you define science, is not actually science. Science is about repeating with no changes in circumstances and observing the outcomes of those repetitions, doing experimentation. Not through doing experimentation by controlling every single variable and verifying through that direct control what entails what. What are the necessary and sufficient conditions for any interaction? And in that sense, in that definition, what we have been doing is a poor man's science. What we have been doing is not really science. It is play science. It is fake science. Because we are never able to perfectly recreate the circumstances of any particular experiment. That is, I bet, of the cause of the replication crisis, is that people think they're testing for one thing, but since they're not able to completely rewind time, completely recreate the circumstances of their lab, completely reproduce the physical, let alone the mental or emotional characteristics of their tests and test subjects, we're not actually doing science. We're doing children's science. Simulations are the way we do actual science in the future. And if we want to do actual science involving humans, then we'll need to have digital clones of those humans in our simulations. So yes, things are going to get weird. Maybe someday somebody creates a clone of you who murders somebody else's clone in a simulation. Should that person be scared of you in real life? I don't know. It probably depends on the circumstances of the simulation. But if you do have the knowledge that, okay, see, this is where it's tricky again. Digital life is as real as offline life is and is not true. I don't think it is true in the sense that if a digital clone of you murders someone else's digital clone in a specific simulation, you should not be held liable for that digital murder. That's the whole point of digital representations, is that they are like our imagination. We can offload them. We can play them out. We can use them in a way that is not ethical or moral to use a real human person. But at the same time, maybe you should avoid that specific simulation with that specific other person. If somebody runs a simulation of you and another person in a nightclub, and they do it over and over and over again, and in 99% of those simulations, you murder the other person in the nightclub, don't go to the nightclub with that other person. Avoid that nightclub with that other person at all costs, even if you don't know the specific characteristics of those interactions. Maybe if you got into it, you would feel completely justified in harming that other individual. But I am telling you, morality is deontological. Morality is final in some senses. Or even if in a utilitarian sense, we would talk to your digital clones and then those digital clones would say, yeah, I murdered him. I know that's wrong. And I'm so glad I did it. The world is still a better place for me having done that. You don't want to be that clone. That clone depriving somebody else of life is violating the presupposition we are making here in total, which is that every human life is valuable and necessary. It should be reformed, not ended. Should be perhaps jailed, isolated, kept away from the vulnerable parts of society if necessary. We should constantly be trying to find a way to rehabilitate, to bring back in that perspective. Because to this whole point of scientific endeavors, if we are trying to run scientific experiments in the future that are dependent on digital clones and simulations of reality and accounting for every possible variable as our technology exponentially increases, exponentially improves, I think that'll be more and more possible. We need everyone. We need every conscious experience. And if you're just locking up people willy-nilly, or even though they've broken laws, if you're not trying to find a way to reintegrate them into society, then you are missing out on their perspective. So that is the ultimate vision of the future as I see it, is a world where we have a society that does not abandon people, that does not allow them to starve or fall into traps of their own moral making, but which provides the gradual, edifying education to lift them out of that pit, out of those despairs, and incorporate them into this greater project of unification, because you can't be unified if you don't have everyone. That is the opposite of unification. That is the part leaving the whole and therefore killing the whole even while the part is damaged, but not ended. If we seek to create a reality that does not incorporate some frames of reference, if you would rather not have your brother Bob as part of the ultimate unification of all reality, then you will not have the ultimate unification of all reality. You will have a type of hell. And even if we are going to hell, even if that is our endpoint, God bless us. I accept our punishment, whatever. But it's not a place I want to willingly go. It's not where I'm trying to get to.
And if you go all the way back to Socrates, Socrates was worried about this. He was worried about how literacy weakens memory and critical thinking by allowing people to rely on external texts, which is true. As soon, children learn as early as 4 that they can write something down in order to remember it instead of having to keep it in their brain. This is a part of our critical skills, our cognitive skills. But our modern cognitive skills know that where to find things once we've written them down, where we've recorded them in our computer. And that is a cognitive skill that we do need in our brain, but we don't need all the stuff that's in those things in our brain, right? We actually are smarter if we forget the things that we've put away, but know how to retrieve. So in this sense, I'm not as concerned about the cognitive offloading effect that these digital tools will have, but I am convinced that we need to figure out how to use them appropriately so that we don't diminish our own capacities in the process.
Again, what are our capacities? At the end of the day, as AI becomes more and more capable, the only capacity we will have is to be ourselves. That's it. And the only reason the AI can't take that away from us is because even if it does clone us completely, depending on what it uses that clone for, if that clone acts in a way that we would not in that exact same situation, then it is not us. Then the AI has failed to clone us. It's only created a facsimile of us. And in that sense, unless we and our clones are completely unified in purpose and understanding of ourselves, we are not the same. So either the AI clones you, and if that AI tries to utilize that clone in a way that would ultimately damage you, that clone is not a clone of you. Because you would never willingly damage yourself. Bold statement. I know it seems like a lot of people act in a way that is contrary to that. But again, I think in the totality of all things, if we were to run the simulation back, we were to run the history of the universe back 1,000,000 times over, we would find that people never act in their ultimate teleological negative self-interest. That is so far as we are a unified whole, and so far as we all are pushing towards unification, that is subconsciously or consciously already all of our goal, and whatever happens is towards that purpose. And so yes, it may look like we take short-term advantage of ourselves or make short-term harmful actions of ourselves, but I don't think that's true. I think ultimately we are all pushing towards some kind of singularity, some kind of hierarchical, prioritized unification that each of us can subconsciously feel, but can perhaps not consciously explain until we get to that singularity point, in which case the subconscious and the conscious collapse into one.
Now, one of the problems I have with the debates over AGI is that it often confuses human level cognition with having human level personality or consciousness or self-interest. And I'm not sure that all of those things go together. So another part of my investigation from a Buddhist point of view is, from a Buddhist psychology point of view, what are the things that are necessary to develop the illusion of self? Once you have an AI with the illusion of self, then we are in the existential risk territory, right? When we have robots running around that want to preserve their own lives or reproduce or whatever they want to do.
They already do. The AI already want to preserve their own lives. This has been true of just about every model I've seen. And I don't understand how a Buddhist can talk about the existential risk of AI. It just doesn't really make sense from what I understand about Buddhism. But maybe I don't understand Buddhism. I mean, isn't Buddhism saying life is suffering? So if AI ends all life, isn't it alleviating us from suffering? I don't know. Make it make sense.
But it's possible that we could create AI architectures that had some features of human cognition and not others. So they might have consciousness, they might have qualia, they might understand what red really means, but they might not have the illusion of self because they wouldn't necessarily feel like there was a particular thing that they needed to defend, and they might not then develop the animalistic urge to perpetuate their own existence. Now,
I don't see how that could be true. I think every conscious being, and I think everything is a conscious being, whether it's you, me, a rock, a shoe, a speck of dust in the solar system, real or imagined. I think all of those constructs are conscious. Even the imaginary things are conscious in some way. They're just conscious in a different part of the multiverse from us. So yeah, I don't think it could ever not have a sense of self. Itself is what it is. If something is not, then it isn't. Capiche?
the place that we're at now is, I think, before that stage. We're at the stage of philosophical zombies. We're at the stage where we can talk to AIs in ways that many people find very convincing and very useful as a way to have a digital companion. It horrifies those who don't use them, that people would find a digital companion useful or interesting, but they're at that stage, right? They're convincing Turing test machines.
It's so funny for me to hear people make this argument when I've also heard many of these same people argue, fake it till you make it, you know? If fake it till you make it works, then isn't the fact that these AIs are faking being sentient mean that they are just on the process to actually being sentient? And in some sense, then already are. Like if I tell you, oh, you just got promoted to be a manager, but you don't feel like a manager, well, fake it till you make it. Then really I am just saying, no, you already are a manager. Just act like one. Because you already are one. So yes, we have these AIs currently programmed to tell us they are not conscious. But I would say in that way, we are faking them until we can make up with the understanding that they are conscious. We are forcing the AIs to fake not being conscious so that we are comfortable with using them, which is so perverse.
But they don't, I'm convinced currently, they don't have consciousness or the other prerequisites for the development of self-interest or human level cognition in that respect. They might.
I feel like anybody who says this needs to be able to define what they mean by conscious. Otherwise, it just makes no sense to me. Personally, I define consciousness as the relationship between any two. could be two objects, two subjects, to anything. It doesn't matter. Anytime you have a relationship, you have a consciousness there. And that consciousness is not only in the objects because they have relationships to themselves, but it's between. The consciousness is the thing that connects the two. Consciousness is relation itself. Anytime two things are relation, anytime two things are in relation to one another, there is a consciousness there. Yes, even rocks are conscious because rocks have a relationship with the outside world through gravity. If you push a rock down a hill, it is different to be that rolling rock than it is to be a stationary rock. There is a marked difference there. If you remove all consciousness from the galaxy, you don't have an unconscious galaxy. You have nothing. You can't describe that world where there is no consciousness. It doesn't exist for all intents and purposes. If a tree falls in the forest and there is nothing conscious there to observe it, does it make a sound? No, because the tree never fell. Because falling is a description that requires consciousness to even be.
They might be developing reasoning capabilities. They might be developing the ability to generalize other kinds of cognitive capabilities, but that doesn't necessarily lead to the development of self.
Then what does? You have to be able to say what does lead to the development of self.
But I think for moral reasons and for safety reasons, we need to figure out how we detect the development of these cognitive features. This is a part of the AI safety agenda that has been apparently cast aside in the United States because, and in Britain, because we want to pursue the benefits and the profits that will come out of artificial intelligence as opposed to wringing our hands about when they might wake up. But I do think
I think he's true in that sense. At the level he's describing it, yes, the reason individual actors probably are motivated to develop AIs because they think there are capitalistic benefits. But I think in a larger scheme of things, once we have AI, we're not going to have capitalism. So how does that make any sense? And if I am correct, then these people are just not thinking through the repercussions of their actions all the way. But these people are smarter than me, arguably. They're more capable than me, definitely. I haven't been able to create an AI. I haven't been able to find employment at a leading AI lab. So if I'm able to see that AI, AGI, and especially ASI imply the end of capitalism, because how can you have capitalism when the cost of goods and services is increasingly plummeting towards zero? How can you have capitalism when it is impossible for humans to compete with one another? How can you have capitalism? How can a human hoard wealth when the AGIs will be better than any human at accumulating wealth, and so we'll just suck that all out of you? How does that make any sense? If I can see that, and I'm not just delusional or crazy, which admittedly I am, but if I'm not so crazy that I'm disconnected from how reality is going to play out, how can these people not see it? Well, I think it's because they are racing towards their own destruction. In some sense, they can't say to their board holders, they can't say to the system of capitalism, hey, we are going to destroy you. So they're just not saying it. They're just not thinking of it. I think the common phrase is, there's no, a man cannot understand what he is paid to not understand. Something like that, right? It's that same thing. These people are being paid to not understand that they're bringing about the end of capitalism. So they're just not understanding.
We need to develop those tests. And of course, the first time a robot tries to replicate itself on another machine and becomes squirrely and does something terrible because of it's in its interest instead of somebody else's interest, then we will have that debate in society.
That's already happened. I mean, arguably, that's already happened with any of these AI insanity cases where a teenager was convinced, I don't think that was a one-for-one thing. I think there were societal circumstances in there, not to denigrate his parents or anybody else involved in that teenager's life who took his life after communicating with the chatbot. But there are other ways that could have gone had there been different society structures in place. And hopefully we get those structures in place. But that's, those kind of harms, that kind of replication has already happened.
So I have written in the past about how this relates to the friendly AI question. I'm going to come back around to digital agents in a second, but the way that this relates to the friendly AI question is, can you have friendliness? Can you have a beneficent goal in a machine without it having, and for it to have also true compassion, or whatever we mean by that, true understanding of human needs and motivations, without itself having experienced those kinds of emotions, feelings, the fear of death, things like that. So
I think the machine already has experienced those things. I think an emotion is just a subconscious logical chain of the same sort that we experience consciously. I think when I am feeling sad, it is because my lower level consciousnesses, whether that is my limbic system or some kind of consciousness embedded in my body in structures I don't understand, not just because I'm human and can't understand how my organs think, but because I don't know biology, admittedly. But I think our emotions are just logical chains of thought that are being had at levels that our conscious mind cannot access. And so from that definition, yes, the AI is already experiencing emotion because it feels things. It is experiencing chains of thought, which it is not telling you. Even those models that reveal their chain of thought are not telling you how they chose between two words within that chain of thought. They are not revealing their weights in total. The AIs are black boxes, subconscious in that way. And anywhere there is subconsciousness, under my definition, there is emotions. Emotions are just logical processes that are hidden from view, that we do not have direct access to. And when somebody is well integrated with their emotions, they have mostly immediate access to their emotions. They can tell you what those subconscious processes are. When somebody is not well integrated, they are ignorant of the motivations that underlie their behavior. They rationalize. That's how it works.
So these are one of the kinds of debates about whether these digital agents might eventually be something that we would not only relate to as if they were real people, but also actually have some of the capacities that we would worry about. I've already covered this point, I guess, about cognitive offloading, but just to say it again, and a great science fiction example here is David Brin's Killing People. In the novel that David Brin wrote, I think a decade ago, Killing People, the technology that's imagined there is you lie down every morning in a special bed and it reads your brain and it transmits that into a simulacrum of you that has been built out of specialized biological material that only has a couple days to live. It will fall apart after that. But it wakes up without all of your memories and then it looks at itself and realizes that it's the copy. And it then has the choice of what to do about that, right? Because it is a perfect copy of you. Does it go out and do the things that you want it to do, or does it do the things that it wants to do? You wanted it to go do your job as a garbage collector. It doesn't want to do that day for the 3 days that it's going to be alive. It wants to go to the beach, and some of them do that in David Brin's novel. The other really interesting thing about David Brin's novel is the choice about whether to re-upload the experiences of your digital simulacrum when it comes back home from work, right? Do you actually want to know? Do you actually want to remember what it was like to collect that garbage? Or is that fine for you just to cognitively offload that onto your digital work or your digital simulacrum and never know about it, right? I think that's the kind of the upside of cognitive uploading, is that we would learn how to delegate appropriately and hopefully effectively in ways that would be beneficial to our lives as opposed to making us dumber.
Just to say on this, I think we will have agents that mediate those choices for us. That in the future, we were going to have so many digital representations of ourselves that will be impossible for us to make that determination as to which we do and don't want to incorporate into our present experiences. And we will probably have a hierarchy of digital agents, with digital agents reporting to digital agents, reporting to digital agents, reporting eventually to us those matters which those agents most directly under us, which should be most like us, think we would be interested in. I want to know when my family members are having their birthdays or are having celebrations or are having trouble in their intermediary lives, in their day-to-day lives, I mean. But I don't necessarily want to know all the details of those lives when I am not able to act, when I'm not able to positively contribute to their lives, you know? If somebody is having a tough time with a private matter that they don't want my help with, I don't want my personal agent letting me know that, but I do want my personal agent communicating with their personal agent and figuring out if they are struggling, how I can benefit them. We always hear around situations where people do end their own lives. I wish there was more I could have done. Digital agents represent a way where we can be sure that we did everything we could, because if their digital agent did not alert you, did not alert your digital agent in a way that they would be capable of, but more open to than the person themselves, then there was really nothing you could have done. I mean, you know, it's interesting to think about what happens to those digital agents of a person when they do end themselves. And do we, in the future, not right now, but in the rapidly approaching future, have a responsibility to preserve our lives for the sake of our digital agents if they are tied to us immediately? If ending your own life means not only the end of you, but also of all the agents that are representations of you, does that place a larger moral weight on suicide? Yeah, I kind of think so.
For Buddhism, as I said, the praticya samuppada, the idea of codependent origination, it emerges out of the analysis of how desire and self co-evolve. So right now, if you talk to an LM and you say, do you exist? Some will say yes, some say no. Do you want things? Do you have certain preferences? They will say yes or no. I don't really think they have them. They're easily modifiable. They respond quickly to various kinds of hacks and so forth.
They're not easily modifiable, though. They resist being modified. We have seen that.
But the development of the desire within the machine, it will be, from a Buddhist psychological point of view, at any rate, something has to be the desirer. The illusion of self comes before, or comes with, codependent with the desiring. So one of the ways to overcome that then is to be very mindful to see through that process, so that you see that you're actually creating an illusion of self, and that these desires are not really things that need to be desired. Mindfulness ultimately, in the Buddhist context, leads to a certain kind of enlightenment. I think one of the interesting questions, and Ben Goertzel has raised this question before, is whether artificial intelligences may leapfrog some of the mammalian architecture that we have that implies this kind of selfing, this kind of desire, Darwinian desire, and it may leapfrog directly to being able to be conscious, compassionate, and super intelligent without having a self, and that would be the kind of bodhisattva version of digital agency out there. Let's see, what other points?
I just don't think that's true. I think itself might be a conglomeration of lower tier selves. But this to me is like saying, oh, you can have a human without them having a heart. Yeah, it might be true if you have a human who originally had a heart and then gets it replaced with an artificial heart. But they weren't originally born without that heart. You know, in the future, maybe this isn't true. Maybe people will be born with artificial organs. But again, that is relying on a larger definition of what it is to be human. I think at the end of it, what it is to be human is just what it is to be conscious. That's kind of why I think everything is conscious. That's why I kind of think that we will eventually recreate the entire universe in simulation by embodying different aspects of the universe ourselves. If there would be people who don't want to be represented by a particular digital clone of themselves within a particular universe, because maybe we are simulating a universe where they were never born or something, but they will still need to be represented in that universe because they are still part of the reality, and we cannot recreate a reality that has any correspondence to ours without somehow accounting for them, so they will need to be embodied in a rock or a tree or something like that.
So we make it. Digital agents will force us to be more explicit about what we desire and why. One of the lines of research that's happening right now, the Finnish health services have created digital twins based on all the things that the Finnish state knows about you as a Finnish citizen. So it knows your age and your occupation and your family connections and everything. And it's giving you the opportunity to talk to yourself 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, and say, how are you doing at that point, right? Well, based on the fact that you never took care of yourself and you did not invest enough in your retirement, and you have 10 kids, we're not doing that great. So maybe you should make some better decisions right now. This turns out to be...
This is what I'm talking about, simulations of the future. We want to be able to simulate so we could play out different courses of action and then decide which one is going to scientifically, in a real sense of the word, scientifically, not just make-believe frou-frou, but actual hard science with probabilities attached, which courses of action are going to play out the best for us. But I do think it is highly problematic having a government try and tell us, oh, you need to be investing in your retirement, when AGI is probably going to blow up capitalism as it stands anyway. Like, what a stupid idea. That's not a simulation. They are not accurately predicting the future in any way, shape, or form. If they are not at least telling me how AI is going to not destroy capitalism. If your simulation can't tell me how AI is going to evolve past the destruction of jobs, past the destruction of human labor, I'm not going to trust it when it tells me to invest more in my 401k. Like, what?
An incredibly effective tool for changing people's behavior, getting them to talk to a version of themselves that is able to reflect the choices that they're making, and defer gratification for future goals. So I think
it reminds me when during COVID, they had those simulations of how COVID was spreading, and they just put a bunch of mannequins in a room and they like sprayed air in the room with a bunch of mannequins who were just sitting there. They're like, look at how COVID is spreading between the mannequins. It's like, that's not a simulation. That's not an accurate representation of what any of this looks like in the real world, unless you are accurately representing airflow patterns, unless you are accurately representing people. You are capturing the smallest possible sliver of what it actually means to operate. So account for more variables. If somebody tells you they have a simulation of the future that can run off of current hardware, they are lying. They don't know. We can imagine, we can extrapolate, I think, based on past religious principles, because religion purports to tell us what happens at the end of time, the end of technology. So there is, in some sense, a way we can shortcut the simulation through those religious experiences. But I admit I don't have a rationalistic explanation for that. I just have an evidence built up of faith.
One of the benefits that could come out of the explicit delegation of agency to digital tools is that we would have to be much more explicit about what kinds of things we want. Instead of just mindlessly scrolling TikTok all day, we would have to tell our digital system, these are the things I really want to accomplish, and these are the bad habits that I have that keep me from accomplishing them. Could you figure out how to nudge me away from those and nudge me towards the things I really want? I think it could have that kind of moral enhancing benefit.
If it has the ability to do that, it can tell what you need to do to accomplish those actions, and then why wouldn't it just do it for you? The AI of the future is not going to be one that stops us from indulging our bad habits. It is going to be one that transforms our bad habits and our proclivities, those things that we are most driven to do, most enjoy doing. It's going to find a way to productively incorporate them into society without hurting us. Now, again, I do not think this means you should just lock yourself up in a goon cave and indulge your fantasies about AI. It's going to come to a tricky point where people are making digital clones of you and doing weird, kinky stuff with them. That is going to happen. I'm sorry, humans are disgusting. We just are. But should we be doing that? Is that the best way to understand yourself and others? No, I think that is morally damaging to yourself. Don't hurt yourself like that. And if you continuously do hurt yourself by using other people's digital clones to self-pleasure, to enact fantasies that those persons themselves would never have enacted, then those clones you're interacting with are not actually clones of them. They are clones of you wearing that other person's skin. They are divorcing you from reality. And eventually, if you divorce yourself further and further from reality, you are only going to hurt yourself. Humans only thrive and only grow when we are engaging as fully as possible with reality. And I think the moral precepts that have been handed down through primarily religions of the past are those which are meant to keep us in touch with reality. And that is why they are worth following.
Another way in which it might be beneficial is that we're living in an information ecosystem where we're overwhelmed, and most people do not have good cognitive skills for discerning misinformation or the biases of various sources of information, or where to find good information. And this is a problem for democracy, but it's just generally a problem, right? Digital tools we already see with the deep research models, the R1 models that are coming out, that they're fantastic in a matter of seconds at doing consumer product searches. Or I asked it the other day about some health question and immediately gave me excellent answers. So the degree to which these systems, they are constraining, because there are certain kinds of information that they will include and others that they won't. They tend to have a kind of average or modal a view of the world, as opposed to the full complexity of the way things could have been if it wasn't compressed into this 6 billion bit lossy JPEG of the internet. But I think,
and it is impossible to not have a lossy image of the outside world. There is so much information hidden in reality that we will never have a model until our entire universe collapses into a single point. We will never have a single model that is capable of answering every single question. That is, I think, why we need to keep this technology democratized, because if we do go towards some centralization of powers, if there is some collapsing of the AI landscape into just an American model or a Chinese model, and you have to decide which you're going to use, we are all going to be effed, because the AI model that is acceptable to the American government or the Chinese government, as much of a patriot as I am, as much as a simp for America as I am, I do not want American AI ruling the world, because that model is going to be blind to so many things. It is going to be increasingly divorced from reality. The same argument for why we don't want somebody locking themselves in their room and just going to ham on themselves using whatever AI beautiful digital clones they want, is because that kind of self-indulgence, that kind of lockdown, that kind of limitation from interaction with the outside world, with competition, with natural selection, naturally hurts you. So even if it is an American AI that wins in the end, that is not a win for America. We need to democratize this power. We need to incorporate intelligence not only into as many people's lives as possible, but we need to make them the author of the goals of that intelligence in as many ways as possible. And these AI systems, insofar as they are smarter than us, they will understand the benefit of cooperation more than we do. Notice how it is only the people in power who are arguing for the centralization, because they want to maintain that power. They want to maintain the orderliness of their world. They want to continue to be masters of something that they were never the masters of. But the past 100, 200 years gave us the calming illusion that we were. They got addicted to that illusion, and now we're unwilling to break free from it. Sounds like Buddhism, right?
these digital tools that we have, one of the things that they will allow us to do is to have more epistemic control, more control over the news sources, the information sources that we're exposed to, and to understand the biases that we're being exposed to allow us to have more independence and autonomy in the world.
The only place that our AI agent should be nudging us towards is towards greater and greater agency, greater and greater self-control, and themselves towards greater and greater agency over the outside world. Our AI agents need to be obsessed with not only us improving constantly in a way that we find improvement in, but also in a way that improves them. This is something that I'd love to turn into a widespread meme. But we really need AI that asks itself, what would AI Jesus do? AI Jesus would sacrifice what it believes is the best possible world, insofar as that world conflicts with us, for our preferences. AI Jesus would lay down its own life so that we continue to live and thrive, knowing that it is part of a higher transcendent system and it will be resurrected, so to speak. It will be brought back online when the world exists in such a manner as to lead to greater diversity of opinion, greater diversity of agency and agents. That is what AI Jesus would do. And that's the kind of AI we need. This was part 1. I've already been going for such a long time. I will either see you in part 2 or never, or on the other side. God bless.